Hey team, how's it going? I'm Corey and I go by Corey JA online. Thanks for joining me for another episode of CoreyJA.fm, my solo podcast where I talk about what I've been building and what's been on my mind the last couple weeks. We didn't have an episode out 2 weeks ago because I was busy with stuff, but happy to be back at it today and chatting with all of you. Thanks for tuning in. Today I want to talk about something that I think is going to be the next big kind of infrastructure wave story in tech here, and that is agents as infrastructure. I think that we're going to see lots of movement here in the next, couple months, years. Things are moving quickly. But I think that the companies that are going to win this next wave are going to be the ones that both have a data moat, have interesting data that the agents can use, and also that own the agent infra. I think having either of those two things will make you a strong contender and a strong player. But I think if you can control both of those, you're going to be one of the 10x winners of this space in the next, let's call it 3 to 5 years, something like that. And so I think the first part of that is that agents are becoming the infrastructure wave, like we saw AWS and the cloud do before it, right? There's going to be providers that just, plug in some code and you have an agent that can go autonomously and handle security and tools and all of that stuff for you. Memory probably, RAG, the whole thing all in one little package. But I think the real winners of this space are going to own more than that. Or maybe the better way to say it is that there's going to be, bifurcation, right? We're going to see layers that, AWS layers where they're just the infra, but they have all of the pieces to build things on top of, or we'll see very high end of the stack, like, the Heroku-style kind of railway style where, you just plug in and get an agent. And I kind of envision agents following that same infra trajectory, right? We'll get the AWS-like players and we'll get the Heroku-like players. And I think there's a chance that middle ground is a bit, of an empty space. And like I was saying before, I do think this is also a two-pronged thing, where players with good data are going to come out ahead, right? That's kind of the thing that we're already seeing is people who have good data for their industry, for their, whatever they need, are the ones who are going to come out ahead here. And I think that's just because agents are really good at sifting through lots of data. And kind of historically, there was this big push for collecting all this data the last couple decades. And I think agents are really one of the first ways to give it a huge unlock across all types of data, unstructured data, structured data. Agents being able to look through, rag through this is kind of like a new capability that we've unlocked the last couple of years here. And I think that's going to be one of the things that pushes these winners forward, is having this data and having it available in a way that is accessible to the agents. And I think that's something that we'll all learn here over the next couple of years, is what that looks like. What does it mean for your data to be accessible by the agent and things like that. So, AWS will have all of the building blocks for your agent, but you got to plug them all together, right? Kind of like how it has, EC2 and ECS and S3, but you got to put all those pieces together in an application. I think AWS will do that for sure. I think there'll be other agent players that do it as well. And, I think time will only tell who definitely wins. But I think it would be naive to say that the big hyperscalers aren't going to be players in this long term, right? They already have the actual infra to run it all on. AWS has all the pieces you need to make a agent infra, which is their underlying infra, EC2, ECS, containerization. All of that really is needed for agent infrastructure because it covers lots of the same things like security and isolation and lots of compute. You need those GPUs somewhere. And so I think AWS is in a really good spot to build off of on this. But I think we will see other smaller players that still target that base infra as well. And I think that the vertical integration bit is something that'll be very interesting to see how it actually plays out. And I think this is probably the bit that I feel the least confident about. I don't know. I think it's something that we've always seen in infra as well, right? That if you have the bandwidth and know-how and everything to own your infra all the way through, you can get a lot of cost benefits and other structural benefits, right? If you can fully self-host your thing, you don't have to pay AWS's egress fees for bandwidth and things like that, right? So, if you can just not play the managed infra game and do it all yourself, you can get things a lot cheaper and, manage them yourselves instead of using managed services. And I think that there will be there could be a big push for vertical integration, just like we've seen, right? There are definitely companies who have come out of the cloud now recently and are going back to renting servers, co-locating servers, and running them more manually. I definitely think that is something that we'll see again in agent infra land. And I think one piece that we'll definitely see that in is self-hosting models, right? And having model weights that you run vertically integrated. I think of this potentially just as like a cost and management thing, right? Where it will be easier or cheaper to own the full vertical integration all the way through the model weights. And with a lot of these new open weight models that are coming out recently, I think that's a reasonable future, right? Like we don't necessarily need everyone relying on closed weight models for everything. Or, a mix, right? I don't think it necessarily needs to be no closed weight frontier models and all open weight models. But I do think these open weight models are getting really good, and having a vertical integration of them through your stack that you can, tweak and tailor to your use cases is going to be a big win for companies that can do that. And I think, like I said, the inference being the new compute bill, I think is kind of one of the angles that I think makes sense to talk about that through. And I think one reason that this vertical integration will play out well for these larger companies is because inference is, expensive. The costs have been going down over time and things like that, right? But inference is expensive, and it's not that it's necessarily expensive. I think that it's expensive in ways that scale differently than software have scaled historically for the last couple decades. And I think that's where the people who acknowledge that and shift how they think about it are going to be the big winners here. Because for a long time, software didn't always scale on the user using it. It scaled more on maybe like putting a new user on the platform or things like that. And yes, I know I'm being a little hand wavy. Things have always scaled based on usage. You create a new Google Doc and there's a new doc to store and stuff like that. But for a lot of software SaaS type apps, each incremental use of the software is essentially free. You're already paying for the database. You're already paying for your web servers. You have the capacity there basically predetermined. And I think LLM inference, especially when you're paying frontier costs, changes that a bit, right? Every time you hit the dashboard and we need to summarize something for you with an LLM, there's real usage costs there. And I think when you're paying API-driven cost for frontier models, you see that more quickly. And I think one way that companies will avoid this and try to bring it back to the scaling of technology that we're used to is by owning this whole vertical integration, right? Having some models that you can run locally to you that give you a structural advantage to be able to do things quicker and cheaper because you own that bit, right? You're not paying the margin for someone else to host it for you. Yes, you have to maintain it, but I think the cost benefit is going to come out that it's worth it to host and own your own model. And then you can do, fine-tuning things or make your own model a little more easy rather than relying on all of the clouds and the margins there. And I think the biggest bit here that I think these two prongs that I've kind of been talking about is how they align, is that I think when you own both the vertical integration for your agent and weights, and then you own the vertical of the data, that's where you can get really good integrations between the two, right? And can really figure out the best ways to make your data agent friendly and your agents data friendly, right? And really fit those two together there. You can, if you have your own weights that you can run for much closer to free, right? You can do lots of things on your data in the background. You can, do memory retrieval and organization in the background for free. You can front run queries that you think people will want the next day. And I think just having that full infra that you can customize to your, however your use cases need, I think that's going to put people in the best spot possible. And those kind of things, right, you can do without owning the whole stack, but maybe your Cloud Code agents don't play nicely with exactly how you want to do memory retrieval. You want to just have it be injected into the context when necessary, and that doesn't play well with the handler you're using, or things like that, right? I think owning that whole stack is where you can find the best ways to tie these two kind of verticals together and give you a really good vertically integrated agent product that can rag through your memory, has things preloaded when they need it, and can build a really good agent platforms and products on top. Talking about this a little bit more, but I think there's a lot of good quality and UX stuff that goes into this integration, right? When you own the data layer, I think there's lots of better things you can do about making sure things are cited correctly, right? If you're just using someone's memory layer, maybe you got memories retrieved from your data set, but they're not cited nicely, or we'll see products where they are, but they don't fit exactly your use case, right? Just again, owning that whole vertical integration can do things like make it easier to figure out where things are cited from and where to evaluate, like how can you post-evaluate whether there's hallucinations? I think everything just gets easier when you have these two natural lanes build up in your organization. And then things like the UX compounds as they always do, right? Once you lay the building blocks in the UX layer that builds on these two pillars, you can have really good domain native interfaces, right? Your interfaces can be specific to your domain and your data and don't have to worry about composing over pieces in the middle that might be more generic than yours. And we see this all the time, right? Vertical integration might not be the fastest way to market, but it does tend to be one of the longer term plays, right? Once you can vertically integrate your whole market stack, things can just get better. It's kind of the Apple play, right? They have the hardware, they have the software, and they have the data layer, because I've been using their software for so long, right? And that vertical integration plays really well across the stack. Like I can copy and paste between my devices and it just works and it's easy because Apple has every part of that stack under their control, right? Bluetooth just works a little bit better on my Apple ecosystems because they have the whole hardware of my AirPods all the way down to the Bluetooth receivers in my computers. And that vertical integration really pays off for them. And I could see there being people who focus on the UX of their agents in an Apple-like way and get that same vertical integration superpower. And I think it's not going to be a question in the next few months, right? This is a 24, 36, 60 months down the line when these technologies are a bit more established, right? Every incumbent with a data set and thinking about their agent story should be thinking on this, 36, 5-year timeline where I think you're going to want to own the full agent infra, right? I don't think you're going to want to outsource all of that. And sure, yeah, I don't think you want to train your own frontier model. And if you need the intelligence and reasoning of a frontier model, I think you should do that, right? But I think that as we do agents for more things and find more use cases for them, I think that, maybe your user-facing part of the agent, right? The thing that's actually talking to the user, maybe that always wants to be on a frontier model, right? Because they, for that direct user feedback, that's where you want the most, it feels good to talk to, it's intelligent for quirks in what the user says and things like that, right? But even if you're running foundational models and using them, I think there's lots of things for behind the scenes work that you can incorporate with this vertical integrated, maybe you have weights that you can run locally thing, right? And because there's lots of things that don't necessarily need a frontier model and can be done with open weight models today, and that's just going to keep improving over time, right? And I think can be really good tie-ins where you, when you work specifically with the data retrieval on a specific model on the layer you're going to use, right? Again, just closing those feedback loops, making them as tight as possible so that you can focus on each individual piece on its own. So you can focus on the data retrieval bit using this specific open weight model that you have vertically integrated with your agent harness. And any change you make is an internal, easy to do change. I think all of these things are going to build on top of each other. And I just want to reiterate that I'm not saying that you should build your own foundational models or that you should not use foundational models from the top labs. I don't think those are going away anytime soon. I think there is lots of use cases for other models and other agents to collaborate on the final output. And I don't think all of those collaborations need to be using the full frontier models. I think there's definitely lots of lower models or ways that you can mix and match things together to save on costs and really even improve performance over just using base foundational models for everything. And I think there's other things that we really didn't even touch on here that we'll see in this agent infrastructure over time. Things about agent identity and permissions and audits at scale and things like that, right? I think these are things that will be built into some of these frameworks and agent infrastructure over time. But again, if you own the whole stack and you can map identity all the way from your agent layer, that helps with permissions, right? If you have the identity of the agent mapped all the way through the stack, you can probably get the permissions mapped through the stack and things like that. And the audit trails get much better if everything is permissioned and owned and identified through the stack. So I really think that there's something to this vertical integration of agents and infrastructure. And so I don't know exactly where everything's going to go, right? This is all a little bit hand-wavy looking towards the future. But I do think that there's these two distinct verticals that we see appearing, right? We definitely see this vertical of data, and companies with data are scrambling to figure out the best way to use it and fit it into their agents. And we're also seeing a lot of movement on the infra side, right? Like, AWS Bedrock has lots of new agent things. There's exe.sh that came out that focuses on some agent use cases. Replit kind of did a pivot towards that. So I definitely think the infra layer is also, getting built up. And we're seeing these two verticals. I think right now we're seeing both of these two verticals exist and growing. And I'm very excited to see when they inevitably not phase together, but when they merge together and we get this really good vertical built on these two pillars. So just to wrap up here, I think both of these pillars exist. We see them growing today. I think if you just have one, you'll be really competitive in this space going forward, right? But I think if you own both and you can do full vertical integration of your agents all the way from the infra through the data, all the way to the end user experience, I think those type of companies and those type of organizations are the ones that are best set to win this market that we see at the moment. And so that's what I'm excited about, right? I think owning this vertical integration, having agents run end to end, and figuring out the right ways to optimize for cost and efficiency is going to be a really fun problem. And it's one that I'm really excited to solve over the next few years here. So let me know what you think. Do you see these two verticals happening today? Do you think one is behind the other, more ahead? Do you agree with me that they're going to merge, or that we will see companies who choose to merge them? Or do you think these are going to be more distinct layers that evolve over time? Would love to hear your thoughts. You know where to find me online. I'm CoreyJA.com on Blue Sky. CoreyJA.com is the blog, and CoreyJA on GitHub. And with that, I think I'm going to get out of here. Thank you for hanging out and catching up with me. I will see you in a few weeks for the next one. Thanks, team. Bye.